This podcast is solely for the attention of institutional, professional, qualified, or sophisticated investors and distributors.
Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about remote work and housing prices. We have already discussed in this podcast the economic implications of the increased use of remote work, particularly with regard to productivity, but today we will focus on the implications for the real estate market. Almost everyone has the intuition that because of remote work, a certain number of people have left the big cities to live in smaller cities, and that this has propelled housing prices out of the big cities. If we take the case of France, official figures indicate that the average price of apartments in Paris barely changed between the start of 2020 and the start of 2022, while it increased by more than 8% in the Parisian region excluding Paris and 15% in the rest of the country. This is clearly a reversal of the dynamic compared to the previous years. So it seems that the rise of remote work has affected housing prices differently depending on the regions. But one of the questions that can be asked is that of the overall impact on housing prices. It turns out that a working paper published by the Fed of San Francisco did this work in the case of the US. Its two authors have worked on 895 geographical areas of at least 10,000 inhabitants, which covers a very large part of the US. They collected for each zone the evolution of the share of employees practicing remote work every day. At the national level, this proportion increased from around 5% before the pandemic to more than 16% in 2020. They also collected for each zone the net population migration, which means the difference between the population that moved into the zone and the population that left the zone. And finally, they also collected for each zone the evolution of housing prices calculated by the company Zillow, and for a smaller sample, the evolution of rents calculated by the company Apartment List. The first part of the study shows that the share of remote workers among employees before the pandemic is strongly correlated with the increase in the use of remote work during the pandemic. In other words, it is in the areas that were the most suitable for remote work before the pandemic that teleworking has increased the most, presumably due to specific characteristics such as having a pleasant environment or attractive amenities. Secondly, the authors show that the areas with the highest share of remote work have experienced the most significant increase in housing prices, and by carrying out cross-section regressions, they come to the result that each additional percentage point of remote work observed in 2020 is associated with an additional increase in housing prices of 1.5% over the period from December 2019 to November 2021. The results are almost the same for rents. An interesting point here is that the authors find no link between pre-pandemic price dynamics and the share of remote work among employees, suggesting that there was indeed an exogenous shock related to remote work during the pandemic. However, as the authors point out, it is difficult to extrapolate what these results represent at a national level, because the upward pressure on prices created by households arriving in an area to work remotely there may be associated with downward pressure on prices in the areas they just left. The authors therefore thought to neutralize the effect linked to migration in order to isolate an effect purely linked to the search of real estate in areas suitable for remote work. In the end, they conclude that net migration accounts for about a third of the price effect mentioned earlier, and that after neutralizing the effect of net migration, an additional percentage point of remote work observed in 2020 is associated with an increase in housing prices of almost 1%, over the period 2020-2021. For the authors, the sharp increase in the use of remote work would therefore explain 15 of the 24% increase in real estate prices observed in the US in 2020-2021. More than half of the rise in real estate prices during this period could thus be explained by the increase in the use of remote work. In conclusion, the authors indicate that the increase in house prices of the past 2 years reflect more a fundamental evolution than a speculative bubble, and that the monetary policy of the Fed would be only of secondary importance. They also make the assumption that the future evolution of house prices will depend a lot on the evolution of remote work. If remote work declines, one could imagine a dissipation of the observed phenomenon, but if it persists and strengthens, the effect on housing prices and therefore on inflation would be even stronger. It is therefore a subject that central banks must follow very seriously. Thank you for listening, and talk to you soon.
All comments and analysis reflect CPR AM views on market conditions and its evolution, according to information known at the time. As a result of the simplified nature of the information contained in this document, that information is necessarily partial and incomplete.